All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. I want you to imagine for a minute as you're sitting on the plane and you see somebody reading your book or watching your TED Talk. How would that make you feel? What would need to happen in order to make that an actual reality? Or what impact would that have on your business? The challenge, though, is that people will get their moments of fame, but it'll be fleeting. They go from being known to forgotten pretty easily. So the question is once you get on the tracks of fame, what needs to happen in order to stay on that and to keep going? That's really going to be the topic of today's conversation. My guest has actually worked with an incredible array of different thought leaders. She's coached both individuals and groups at different stage levels, has written multiple best-selling books, and has been able to command these extraordinary fees for sharing her expertise. But none of that actually happened by accident. It was all carefully orchestrated and strategized. One of the biggest brainchilds behind that strategy just so happens to be Elizabeth Marshall. And so, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Well, you could be one of two things, and I've learned this being in the business that I'm in now. I'm either the dirty little secret, or I am the secret weapon. So, how does it feel to be both, depending on who you're referring to? I think most people look at you as actually their secret weapon.
Yeah, I would say most of the time, but depending on where they are on the thought leader journey and what they're experiencing at the moment. But it's such a privilege to be able to come alongside my clients, whether they're, entrepreneurs like Shema or executives who often have a variety of business initiatives around them, product business, service businesses, other things that they're doing in addition to writing books and speaking, because at the root of it, their motivation is to make that long-term impact on their audience and in their industry, and that they want to do that in service and to provide value instead of like chasing that 15 minutes of insta fame.
Yeah. So actually, I'm going to start today's session with a question that I just got from a client. And so he said, when you're building a personal brand and you're building a corporate brand, how much in lockstep alignment do both of them have to be? Or is it okay for the personal brand to just sort of be a little bit kind of out there?
Very thoughtful question. And I think it's a real time consideration for all founders, regardless of whether you're, starting scaling up at seven, eight, or nine figures. No matter what, our audiences, whether they're B2B or B2C, they have expectations now of founders and CEOs, and they look to us for our point of view, for our expertise, and for us to kind of read the tea leaves of sorts of what's coming in the industry, like what to expect, what kind of products and services should we be looking at and thinking about. We want to buy from humans that we know, like, and trust, and we also want to buy from companies and organizations that feel authentic, that feel relatable, and they feel like, the neighbor next door. And so coming back to your question, as an executive and a founder, we're expected to have a personal brand, whether we really want one or not. But that can be a good thing, where we might be asked to speak on panels or to be a part of industry conversations. And while the personal brand and the company brand don't have to be matchy matchy, there needs to be integration and alignment. So the personal stories that you share, how does that tie into the focus of your company in terms of the solutions that you offer, the problems you solve, the audience that you serve? That being said, you can share aspects of your journey, of your expertise that are not exactly tied to the mission and the vision of the company, as long as it feels like cohesive and integrated.
I almost look at it on a personal brand. What you're wanting people to do is have that emotional connection to you, where you really want people to know, like, and trust you at a very cliche marketing sort of, component. On the flip side, on the corporate component, there is that emotional people buy for emotional reasons and rationalize with logic, but the emotional component on the corporate side is a little bit different. It's usually tied into, how is this going to make me appear to my peers? What is this going to be safe? Am I going to look stupid? Am I going to look smart? So there's emotional components on the business brands, but on the personal brand, it's, do I like you? Do I think it's cool? And you can even see that to some extent with Elon Musk right now. And you see that Twitter's growth happens to be in direct correlation with how much people like Elon and how much people
100%.
don't like Elon.
100%. Well, and I think that comes back to so much of what you've talked about, like that you need to understand your audience in order to know how you're going to create value. And so, whether we're talking, obviously, the corporate brand is very much focused, on the audience and what types of stories, content, values, solutions will feel relevant to them. But even on the personal brand side, to keep that in mind, I mean, well, we love to tell stories and to share for our own reasons. I think keeping that audience front and center, even when you have the personal brand hat on, is really important. Again, there's a little more flexibility and freedom there, maybe more expansive than the customers and consultants for your corporate brand, but they're still very much paying attention to your personal brand.
So I was talking to a client recently, and he said, my business has done really well. I never really had a personal brand. And honestly, I don't think that it's appropriate for me to have a personal brand because I'm not really that strong at writing. I'm not really, that good behind the camera. I'm not super articulate. I kind of like being the person, sort of that hidden leader, and just let the company do its own thing. How do you respond to a comment like that?
Well, so one of the things that I like to say in response is from a validation place. Like I call it the reluctant messenger syndrome, that they see like all the grandstanding that, often on social with personal brands, and they don't want to be that person, whether it's their origin story or what keeps them going in terms of the purpose with the business. They don't want to make it about themselves. And that's an amazing thing. But at the same time, when they can focus on thought leadership or their personal brand as actually another for providing greater value. They can look out at the industry and, the problems that interface with their industry to say, what is my point of view? How do I see things differently? How are we,
Sure.
through our products and services, evolving and completing the conversation, moving it in a different direction? And often when I talk to founders and executives who have that reluctant messenger syndrome, when I can help them see that this is a way to add value by focusing on the audience and writing content, creating videos, whatever medium it may be, in service to their audience, that usually shifts that feeling of hesitation and reluctance.
Yeah, totally got that. And when we just look at the research of the benefits of building a personal brand, what we'll see is that a personal brand will grow faster than the business brand. We'll also see that a personal brand, when you're running marketing funnels through the personal brand and a similar marketing funnel to the business brand, you're going to get a higher conversion rate on a personal brand than on the business brand. When you run paid advertising on both, you'll tend to see that your cost of acquisition, if I can recall correctly, it's something like 40% lower on the personal brands than it will be on the corporate brand.
100%.
When you're running both the business and the corporate brand simultaneously, what you'll find is that both perform at 1.33 times better than run individually, which means that it's better to have both a corporate and a personal brand than just one and of the same. I resisted building a personal brand for a long time. I had all these limiting beliefs. I was diagnosed with having one of the worst cases of learning disabilities that the doctor had ever seen. When I started, I was a bumbling idiot. Nothing I said made any sense. The value of the content I put out there wasn't even that good. I've been so tempted to pull some of the old videos and whatnot that I have down because, I really am embarrassed to my core, but at the same time, it serves as a reminder that done is better than perfect. And unless you start, you're never going to get better.
Absolutely. And, I love something that you said, that sometimes, we hold ourselves hostage with the stories we tell ourselves. And, we might say, right, you have a founder with, 5, 10, 15 years experience. I have, what could I possibly offer, in terms of my personal brand? You might be sitting here saying, well, what in the world would I like write or create a video on? And you might go through, the FAQ on your company website. You might think about the last 3 months of like customer service challenges and questions, and therein lies a treasure trove of content and inspiration. Maybe you don't write an article literally on the question or challenge that came in, but it might be an inspiration for a broader perspective. Another way to get really in sync with or in touch with what you might potentially be able to share is to look at the broader industry space to say, okay, we're one of many players in this space, and there's three other things to keep in mind here, because it leads to XYZ like trends or opportunities that might be coming up. And so for those who are first getting started with personal brand, are you feeling like that you don't have that content, just scanning and seeing what's out there in terms of other voices in your industry or in adjacent industries can often be a great source of inspiration as well.
So let's pretend for a minute. Let's say that I come to you and I'm like, all right, Elizabeth, here's the deal. I want to get on the fame train and I want to stay on it. I want people to be reading my book on the plane and seeing my TED talk and all that other fun stuff. So walk me through, how do you make something like that happen?
I'm notorious for talking people out of books and, going down this path because, well, we have egos as founders and executives. For their egos are important. They allow us to step on stage, but when ego goes wild and it becomes about us versus our audience, that's where that long-term strategy will often go off the rails. And so really thinking about your motivation of like, why would you want to step on that plane 5 years from now? That is about that coming back to that place of being in service to your audience and in your industry. And when you start from that place, that then informs the content and your strategy. And so one of the things that I like to say as well is that your thought leader strategy should be as unique as your message. For that long-term success, it really is about conducting both those controlled experiments and then customizing your strategies all along the way, whether it be like how you're showing up on LinkedIn or how you're recording YouTube videos or how you're showing up as a speaker, because then that really becomes that regenerative source of satisfaction internally while we're
Sure.
playing that long game of growing the audience and shifting the conversation in our industry.
So how would you find my message?
Well, so again, it comes back to the audience, and you look at, for example, the core problems that your audience has and the solutions that you provide with your business. And so, if you think about your message as a body of work, we have a lot of areas of expertise. And within that body of work and all of the topics and areas of expertise that we have, you can look at that, and whether you are a visual person and you like to use a mind map or whatever it may be to help you review that catalog of expertise, then you can take a step back and say, what are the topics and messages that I was put on this earth to share, like that really light you up, that you could talk about ad infinitum for months, weeks, months, and years on end? Well, that starts giving you the breadcrumbs and trails to follow to say, that's something I'm committed to talking about.
One of the examples that I've given several people recently is I've said, look, if you got $1 billion, if I wrote you a check right now for $1 billion, what would you still talk about even if you didn't need to
100.
get paid?
Absolutely. Yes.
And you and I mean, we've kind of known each other now for a number of different years, and there are certain topics that you and I will talk about. All of a sudden, there was like a spark of conversation that drove so much energy. Nothing else mattered. The conversation was the most important.
100%. We have this catalog of all these areas of expertise, as you mentioned, that we need to stay on top of. We need to stay on top of the trends. We need to stay current. But that doesn't mean that it's your next TEDx talk idea. It's not your next book idea, right? Like I'm asked all the time about like how to write endorsements for your book or how to put together a great book launch that fits your business audience,
Yeah.
business model, message, and audience. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to write a book just about book launches. Now, if you ask me about after the launch, how do you go from that 15 minutes of fame to be that category leader for the long term? You can't stop talking about that because it's so important.
So how do you? So how do you get back on the fame train, right? How are you fueling that momentum in order to stay on that fame train and grow it and expand it?
Well, I think that several elements. The first one is mindset. There's a like conventional wisdom might say that, if you somehow manage to have like an amazing launch with a bestseller, but even if you do achieve like New York Times bestseller status, book launches are the starting point, not the finish line. So it's
Yep,
shifting your perspective to playing that long game. So that mindset shift is really important. And then secondly, it's understanding what are those consistent habits that you need, those external habits that you need to be practicing, whether it is your content strategy for those who feel really love speaking and being on stages. And it doesn't have to be a keynote, can be workshops, can be facilitation, interactive messages. Like, do you want to create videos? What are all the ways that you want to share your message?
yep,
And then build that relationship with your audience because and I'll use a book as a metaphor here, but this is true about all aspects of thought leadership that, it's often thought that the biggest hurdle is to get a buyer for your book, but we have to go from like buyers to readers to ambassadors. And in those early weeks, months, and years of being on the thought leader journey, we have to be our own best ambassador as we're continuing to build the audience. And then once those that audience become buyers and then readers and they start telling others, then we have that community of ambassadors about around us that help spread the message for us.
gotcha, gotcha. So, how does somebody get on stages all across the world and so forth? What is the key to that?
Well, I mean, I think there's multiple aspects to that. First, it's understanding like your audience and business model to say it's not just any stages, but what are the right stages for me? So, like really being clear on that strategy and positioning. And then there's also the skill element as well. So as founders and executives, we're expected to have good communication skills and many of us do naturally have those skills, but the unique skill set that allows you to be an amazing keynote speaker is a different skill set than maybe, standing in front of a more intimate workshop setting. So in crafting that unique thought leader strategy for you, you want to understand like what are my natural gifts, skills, and talents? Where do I need to invest in some training? I mean, a lot of the top keynote speakers that you might see in your industry and beyond, it might appear as if they are just naturals and they were just born that way. But when you pull back the curtain and you ask them, many will tell you they've spent hours and hours and hours
Yep,
of like practice developing their stories, working with coaches. And so going back to your message, audience, and business model and your stage as a thought leader, there's always opportunities to get on the right stages. But it's just understanding what makes the right sense for right now. Is it that main stage keynote for like a national conference or a major corporation, or is there a local or regional opportunity that helps you reach the right audience, will help you attract more of those clients, grow your platform? Sometimes we can dismiss those because it's like, oh, that's not big or sexy enough, when in
right.
fact, that is exactly the right thing to be focusing on.
It was funny. I was talking to a gentleman many, many, many years ago, and he was talking about his keynotes and when he gets on stage. And he shared that everything, all the way down to when he gets a sip of water, was choreographed. And then, lo and behold, I get a keynote speaking opportunity many years ago. And the first time I got this keynote, I remember this guy saying everything was choreographed. And I'm thinking, shoot, I don't know. I know what I can talk about, but I don't really know. So I hired a speaking coach, and it was one of the best investments that I made because I understood just how to create that emotional hook and how to keep people's attention and hook them all the way to the end and leave them with something memorable. Then there are maybe moments when you decide to step off the stage and walk into the audience and share something maybe deeply personal. And then to your point, when you do a really good job telling that story, you've got people in the audience that share and spread the word of that story, which then captures the attention of other people. And it's sort of like, continues on that way.
Yeah, I love that. As long as we're focusing on our audience and crafting that message around what they most want and need, the way of delivering that, I believe strongly should be not only aligned with our gift skills and talents, but delivered in a way that we're excited to deliver it. Founders and executives love to be a part of a group discussion. And so the back to the you can have it your way, you can find that path that works for you. And sometimes you don't know until you try, to the point you made earlier. And if you feel like you're not really sure what method is going to work best for you, that's where starting where you are and finding those low risk opportunities, either locally or regionally or with smaller groups, so you can kind of test out, well, how do I feel most comfortable as a speaker? What really helps me shine and be in my element, not just in terms of the content you're sharing, but how you're telling your stories, and you feeling like, wow, I'm not putting on an act or performing.
Yeah,
This really helps me show up and be myself, because as we talked about earlier, that's not only the brands and people that we want to buy from and buy for, but is a key ingredient for helping us spread whatever message that we are the messenger for.
sure. Way, way back in the day, somebody once said to me, I want you to think of the two most influential people in the world, dead or alive, it doesn't matter. So I had a couple people, that came to mind. They said, I will bet you right now that they both have two things in common. They both either wrote a book or have a book written about them, and they're public speakers. And it's funny because that actually was true about every situation I thought of. And now, when we move forward into today, maybe there are some people that didn't write a book, but instead they've amassed a massive social media following. Or, maybe they're not public speakers, but they are on YouTube, all the time and so forth. So when we look at the commonality of today's influencer and, those people who have those element of fame, they are very prolific in content, whether it's speaking or written. When we're talking about stay factor and what needs to happen to really keep them, is just this understanding that robustness is built by having multiple different spokes in the wheel. That, you maybe have an influence on Instagram, you might have a million followers on TikTok, but you're missing a large group of population that isn't even on it.
Well, and I think, Charlie, one thing that really helps with not getting caught up in like a particular like channel or platform or medium is to really take a step back and say, okay, how can I build more strategic relationships with individuals and groups that serve the same or similar audience? You and I are both a part of MMT, an entrepreneur
Yeah,
group. And
sure.
I just did a session on this, that when you can have like one right relationship with a relevant industry group, association, membership community, there could be multiple opportunities to reach a wider audience just with that one relationship.
Yeah.
Because when you have larger industry organizations, they have blogs, they're writing newsletters, they have a podcast, maybe they have a webinar series, and they have like in-person events, virtual events. And so when you focus on building more of those relationships, it can open up, like, you don't have to be the sole publisher of the content. I like to say that there's three types of content. There's created content, content that you create yourself and put on your own channels or your own site. There's curated content. You might see something, a newsworthy item that's mentioned in HBR or the Journal or Wired or whatever it may be, that you can share and be that curator of a point of view or something that needs to be said. And finally, there's the collaborative content that you create in partnership with
Yeah.
other individuals and groups. And I think sometimes the reason people push back on, oh my gosh, I can't do this personal brand thought leadery thing, is because they feel like it's all up to them, instead of saying, who can I play in the sandbox with and have a great time? And then, oh, wow, we just created all this content and I didn't even realize it. And now with the AI, you have record a couple of videos or an interview, and you can run that through various AI tools and have all kinds of like micro pieces of content just from that one collaboration or play date together.
Absolutely. So I know we're pushing up against the clock, where this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say is your number one biggest best tip for people who want to take their company beyond seven figures?
So I think, I was thinking about John Kabat-Zinn, who is a like renowned meditator, spiritual leader, and it's, like, wherever we go, there we are. We bring certain like patterns, blind spots, and behaviors to a certain point to then where we feel like we're stuck on that speed bump, as you say. And while we may need to do a lot of practical things like putting in more systems, hiring, sales or revenue officer, or expanding our product line, at the end of the day, we need to look at both the patterns that are at play in our company and in the industry, more broadly outside of our brand, to say, okay, what patterns can we take advantage of? What
Mhm.
patterns are creating blind spots for us? And what part am I, as the founder and executive, playing in those patterns for better or worse? Because I think a lot of times the greatest shift can be made when we look in the mirror. And that's not like an evaluative statement. It just means that when we can grow personally and individually, that often opens up, whether that's that new perspective, that innovative idea, because we now have a journaling practice, we're taking that time to really invest in ourselves personally, we literally see the world differently. And as a result, those practical ideas come to us.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. So, ladies and gentlemen, this wraps up today's Beyond Seven Figures podcast. But, Elizabeth, people want to learn more about you and the work that you do. Where do we take them?
So I am on the web at elizabethmarshall.me. Spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, some on Facebook and Instagram, but knowing my audience, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Fantastic. So, some of the key takeaways as just a good reminder is number one, the importance of a personal brand. If you're not already building your personal brand, I encourage you to invest the time into doing that, making sure that your message is integrated with the company, as Elizabeth says, message and your company integrated with your market. Very important point. And then it's about remaining consistent and persistent, putting that message out there and then reinforcing it. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. I wish it was that easy. But just like growing a business, it's something that you plant the seeds, you nurture it, you continue to build and develop it with the right people around you, like Elizabeth, for example. She can help to accelerate that into new levels. So, once again, this wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. For more tips, information, and strategies for taking your company beyond seven figures, also check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gadet with my friend Elizabeth Marshall, and I will see you in another episode.